All right, so pasuk yesterday.
Yes.
Leiv Navon yikne das ve'ozen chachamim tvakesh das. The heart or mind of the Navon will acquire knowledge, and the ear of Chachamim will seek knowledge. And our questions that I have listed here are: how are these opposites, or are these opposites? Let me just close this. Not that it really helps, but it feels like I'm taking action. Oh yeah. Thanks. Right. So are these two opposites, or if they are both, if they both constitute one side, then what is the opposite of that? What's the difference between kone and mavakesh? What's the difference between leiv and ozen, and why does it associate each term with its respective person? What is the difference between the way that the Navon relates to das and the way that the Chachamim relate to das? That's like the main question. And then also, does it apply when it says that the Chachamim seek? This should really be a separate question. No, actually, it shouldn't. Does it imply when it says the Chachamim seek? Does that mean that they seek and they fail to acquire? Like, is it less than yikne or is it more than yikne? Or is it just different than yikne? I assume it's got to be less or more. What is a Navon in this context? What is Bina? What is a Chacham in this context? What is Chachma? Why is Navon in singular, Chachamim in plural? Who's the audience? What's the practical application? And is this really true? Yeah. So we had at least one direction yesterday, right? We were saying that, so the thing I mentioned is that everyone's going to agree with is that Bina is Mevin Davar Mitoch Davar. And then we saw some examples of where Chachma, at least in Mishlei, if not elsewhere, is received knowledge, right? Is knowledge that you hear. So we saw that in Rashi at the beginning of Mishlei, who says Yishma. So the pasuk itself, Yishma Chacham Yosef Lakach. He will hear and increase his learning. But the Navon Takbulus Yifne, the Navon will acquire strategies. And Rashi there said the Chacham is a Bal Shmua, and the Navon is Mosif Al Mashalamad, because he's maybe Davar Mitok Davar. Then we saw Rashi in Devarim, when it says Chachamim Unavonim, and he quoted the Chazal that says a Chacham is like a rich money changer, that when they bring him business, he makes money, and when he doesn't, then he sits idly. Whereas the Navon is like a merchant money changer, that if they bring him business, he makes money, and if not, then he goes out and finds it on his own. Yeah, those were the things we brought in. I think that's a summary. I mean, I know there are other like snippets of approaches and stuff, but like any other.
Well, just a question on. It's not a question on the approach.
Yeah.
On the idea, I guess.
Yeah.
Could you have a person who, like, in some areas is like a Chacham and in other areas is not?
That's a good question. I think that's going to be an outcome of how we learn the pasuk. I would say yes.
Okay.
But in other words, like this, you could definitely have a person who in certain areas is a Chacham, in certain areas is a Navon. Like, take for example someone who like is a Lamdan, but then when he's learning science, he's not like at the level yet where he is like there. He's not at the level where he's like generating his own knowledge, you know. But what I have reservations about is like, to what extent does the Navon perfection carry over, like to change his mind, like not change his mind, like not change your mind, but like to to what extent is it a virtue of his intellect, and to what extent is it like a level of mastery of a particular area of knowledge? You know, like I can't help but feel that someone who is a Navon in one area, that makes him more predisposed to become a Navon in other areas, which means that there is a certain like universal perfection of the way his mind works, you know. So that's my reservation. Yeah.
So like, let's just take an example. Let's say like Richard Feynman.
Yeah.
I think he was I think he was a Navon in science.
Right. Right.
But I think when he applied himself to other areas, he he tried to like not just know what other people were saying about it, but to like learn it for himself. Right.
And it's funny because he's the one who said, one of my favorite Richard Feynman quotes is a scientist thinking about non-scientific problems is just as dumb as the next guy, you know. And like, I understand what point he's making, but I always like think to myself, like, that's not true. Like no, it's not necessarily true. Like, he can be just as dumb as the next guy, but a person who has a scientific mind the way Feynman's mind was is better equipped to not be like a dumb guy, you know, in another area.
It's funny because I agree with the quote, but I don't agree with it about him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the Rambag and the Rambam's Minyan and Mitzvos. You got all the right
Yeah.
principles, but not you didn't apply them well. Yeah.
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 Right.
So, yeah, like there's perfection of factual knowledge,
Yeah.
which I think is what he's addressing. Like scientist doesn't have any. I think he's talking about two things.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing he's talking about is perfection of factual knowledge. The scientist just doesn't have any more than that.
Right.
The second is I'm including in factual knowledge of what other people have said about it,
Mm-hmm.
which like let's say like
The Chachma.
the Chachma,
Yeah.
In terms of perfection of Chachma, he doesn't necessarily have that.
Yeah.
It's not his area.
Right.
But in terms of ability to think originally,
Yeah.
that's something that if you're an original thinker in one area, you like depending on why you're an original thinker, you may it might carry over.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I agree. All right. So let's take this idea and
I have a question on our explanation.
Sure.
What's the practical application?
Well, we haven't really. I don't feel like we defined the idea yet. So let's rope in the idea with. I was looking through the Mefarshim this morning, and Matsudas David I think says this approach, or takes this approach. So Matsudas David said was there Matsudas Tion on this or no? No. Okay. So Matsudas David. Wait, I'm on the wrong parak now. Oops. Okay, here we go. He says, Lev Navon, mi sheyesh lo lev Navon, hine me'atmo yikne hada'as bebinas halev. So a person who has a mind of a Navon, he will independently acquire or produce knowledge through the understanding of his heart. Val hachachamim she'ein biyadam ela ma sheshamu, but the chachamim who only have what they've heard, hine oznam tavakesh v'tachzor achar hada'as, lishmo mizulas, their ear will seek and search for da'as to hear from others, because they don't have the understanding to acquire it on their own. So that I think is the clean distinction that I was making yesterday from the other sources, but now we're seeing it in Matsudas David. So now the question is like, what's the idea? Like this is really like an elucidation of the facts, right? But I don't think this is a practical decision-making idea yet. So I just wanted to like set it up in that way. Yeah. And I also think that my lingering question still also is, are they relating to knowledge in the same way? Like, is what the Chacham gets the same as what the Navon generates, or is it different? The pasuk, the wording of the pasuk seems to suggest that it's the same, but I mean, just from the fact that I used the word das twice, but like, I guess along the lines of what you and Joe were saying yesterday, when it says the lev is yikne, to me, a kinyan halev is stronger than a shmias ha'ozen. You know, it's not just a reference to the way they get it,
Right.
just two different channels. It's like, it's going to affect them in a different way. So I'd like, and I totally open to the idea that maybe that's not the case, but like, that's where my mind is going.
So I have two possible practical application ideas.
Yeah.
One is that, oh wait, I forgot one. One is that if you are like kind of to know yourself, that you, let's say, know you're a chacham, and don't try to, don't try to generate ideas in an area that you're not ready to.
Oh, okay.
Because you could just be imagining.
Right.
things,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's one idea. I forgot what the second one was, but I guess you could say that yeah, I don't know.
Okay, that is a good practical application, right?
Yeah.
Is know whether you're a chacham or navon in an area, and don't. I think it actually does cut both ways. In other words, if you are not capable of generating your own ideas, so then don't try. I think the vast majority of America in politics could learn that lesson.
Yeah.
And then that's something I was talking about recently with someone about in politics, is that like the actual policy decisions in any area are so complex and so dependent on expertise in particular like subjects and particular cases.
Yeah, but because everything in politics has like ramifications. Like let's say you lower taxes.
Yeah.
Then that means that the government is circulating less money.
Right.
And the economic ramifications.
Right, right.
That's the whole.
Yeah.
It's like a very complicated thing.
Right. So like, so that's a case where like you got to recognize you're not an Avon, you're a Chacham, or halavai, you'd be a Chacham and actually listen to the experts. That's the opposite of the pasuk, right? And then the other thing also is like if you are and this is like less catastrophic in terms of the consequences, but if you are a Navon, so then you should not just rely on what you receive from others if you're capable of like assessing it on your own. Like the area that I'm thinking, the reason why I'm thinking along these lines is like this is like what Rבינו Bachi and Pakuda and like the Sefer Chinuch say when we looked up in the midst of Anochi, that like if you are capable, if you have no choice but to rely on tradition for your Yedias Hashem, so then you should rely on that. But if you're capable of like verifying it on your own and investigating it on your own and you don't, so then that's intellectual laxity. And not only could you like, do you run the risk of like relying on something that's not actually true or not actually reliable, but like you're also from a metaphysical standpoint, not that we care about that in Mishlei necessarily, you're like the way they express it is God will hold you accountable for that. Like the example that Rבינו Bachi and Pakuda gives is he says, let's say a king tells you, let's say you're a tax collector and the king tells you, go collect taxes and count the money that you receive yourself to make sure you get the right amount. So let's say you go and you collect taxes, but you rely on what the people tell you who give you the money and you don't count it. So then he says, even if the king finds out that you got the right amount of money, he's still going to be angry at you because you didn't do what you were charged to do, which is to verify it on your own.
Right. It's almost like an accident if you get the right amount.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So those are good applications. Yeah.
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 I was
Oh, sorry.
I think.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I'm not saying in any places, so it's not like so much to discuss, but I can see like two types of practical ramifications of this.
Mm-hmm.
Either that knowing the distinction is helpful in some way, like what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
Or that you should be trying to be a Navon and not a Chacham.
Right.
I think those are like the.
Yeah. That's a good point. There is a basic like premise here that Navon is better than a Chacham, and that we can't ignore that. That implication of the pasuk.
Yeah. So I guess methodologically, when you say that that psukim initially fall into like one of these two categories, or do you think the practical ideas fall into one of those two types of things? Either that knowing the distinction is helpful in some practical way, or that you should be trying to be the good one?
I don't think it's two categories. I think you're going to find them overlapping all the time or most of the time.
Well, my question is, do you think the question is there anything other than those two categories? That's look at other thing.
I don't know. Yeah. Ezra, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I was wondering. Did
wow.
Did
you're gonna wonder?
I was gonna ask. Generally, do you usually wait for who is the audience question at the end? Because in this case, it seems like you're kind of able to already say something about the audience.
Yeah, you're right. I don't necessarily think there's a particular time when you ask that, because sometimes you kind of have to ask that in order to arrive at an idea. Here I do think though that this is going to be applicable to anyone who's seeking to develop in Chachma or inclined to not. I wanted
No, it seems like, is the goal of the audience to get Chachma? Because it seems like that's in my very limited exposure to Mishlei, it seems like that's like Chachma is always seems like a means in Mishlei.
Yeah.
To like your actual wants.
Yeah.
So is that what's happening here, or is Chachma the goal for the person?
when you say Chacham, do you mean Chacham in the technical sense that we defined it here, or do you mean like
Yeah.
Das?
I guess. Yeah, dots or whatever. Just getting a clearer idea of things.
Yeah, that seems like.
Is that the goal of this project?
So I don't think I'm going to treat it as though your question is about Das, not Chachma, just because I think if you say Chachma, that really confuses things.
Right.
Right. So the answer is yes, and I think that this one actually works out for the way we've been approaching Mishlei, and then also the way others like the Ralbag approach Mishlei, for example, or Rashi. So the way we're approaching Mishlei is that this is going to be about maximizing enjoyment in the long run in terms of decision making, and that type of da'as, this distinction is relevant to.
In terms of why is that?
Because you will be able to make better decisions about any area if you're capable of generating your own principles and not just applying things you've received. And then this is also applicable to, let's say, like the Ralbag and Rashi, who take Mishlei to be also about like how to investigate knowledge on a theoretical level, whether it's toward knowledge or philosophical knowledge or scientific knowledge. So I think this applies equally to both.
Okay.
I want to answer the question that I raised in terms of like what the difference is between the way, or actually I don't want to answer it yet, but let's just get that final step though, is that, so is the das in the Navon the same as the das and the Chacham, and they just get it in different ways? Or does the fact that the Navon generates it make it different? What do you think? You can tell what I think, yeah.
I'm gonna rely on something that I heard from not something that Richard Mitchell in Gifts of Fire talks about how there's like a certain quality to something that, like when you like think about something on your own,
Mm-hmm.
then you then like the idea is like really like a part of you, and like no one else can really like put an idea in your mind. It's only like what you think about that thing that you.
Okay, so this is something that I think that there's room for discussion about, because let's say, all right, let's take three people. Okay, the Navon on the one side. Okay, on the one extreme, the Chacham who just hears an idea and accepts it on the other side, and then the person who hears an idea and then thinks into it. So is that person a development within Chacham, or is that Navon? Because you just in what you said now seem to be saying that that takes you out of the category of Chacham. Yeah. And to my mind, that is still within Chacham, because the difference between Chacham and Navon here is the way that they attain the knowledge. And like, I do think it is possible. Like, in other words, the first guy who is just relying on someone without actually thinking it through on his own, he still has knowledge. It's just that he hasn't verified it, or he hasn't, and then when he thinks about it, so then that knowledge is his, or like he understands it better, or he's like conversant about it, or it's not just that he knows about it, but he knows it. Like Richard Mitchell's a distinction here. I in my mind, I still class that as a Chacham, because he's not going out and generating new knowledge. And that seems to be what the emphasis was on the sources we've seen so far. Yeah. So,
would you call that opinion, if you like?
No, not the way that they're saying it. I do think that it resides in his lave in a different way, but the way that the Matsudas has said it, and the way that Rashi said it, and the way all those seem to point to the fact that like they're going out and getting new knowledge. Yeah. And that's not new knowledge; it's just deeper knowledge.
Right.
And I think that's also why you shouldn't diss a Chacham. I mean, not that you would do that, but like, there's a, like, I remember once in yeshiva, I don't know how well you guys know John Siskovic, or if he's in any of your shiurim, but like, I remember he said once, I don't even know the context. He said, if the only thing I walk away from our yeshiva with is the ability to appreciate ideas, and even if I didn't become a lamdan, like Dayenu, like that, and like there is a lot of room for development within Chacham who's receiving knowledge. Like, look, I mean, we don't really know historically what this, to what extent this person I'm about to say is a Navon or a Chacham, but look at Plato, right? all of the teachings of Socrates that we have are from Plato. Now, allegedly, he's recording what his teacher taught him, you know? So let's be Don Lakaf Chova and assume that he was just a Chacham. That's pretty good. Like, that's really, really good, you know? So even if he never came up with his own philosophy, like, you can get really, really far through Chachma, you know? So that's my current theory about the Chacham, that understanding firsthand or going deeper into it or like knowing it is really still within Chachma.
Question.
Yeah.
Let's say like you look at, let's say any idea, let's say that we get from Mishlei.
Yeah.
Where we're working it out
Yeah.
on our own. And
Yeah.
it's not like someone told it to us.
Yeah.
We're kind of using a pasuk and drawing it out from the pasuk.
Yeah.
Would that be a Chacham or not?
It's a good question. So I think in the experience we've had in Mishlei this year here, I think that there are elements of both. You know, like I think that a lot of the ideas we have arrived at through our own insight, and then just kind of like confirm them or sharpen them by looking at the Mefarshim, and then other times we're kind of like beholden to the Mefarshim to see what they get, and that's going into the Chachma there.
Right. Well, yeah. I guess my question is let's say that you just look at the pasuk.
Yeah.
And like it's. Yeah, you just kind of have to decode it and stuff.
Yeah, that would be Navon, in my opinion. Actually, well, I guess it's a good question, right? Because we are relying on what Shlomo was saying. I mean, it's hard also because like the nature of facts versus theories in any field is that what you call facts really often, it's like they're like relative terms, you know, like let's say in science, a lot of things that we rely on as facts really are the outcomes of theories that are facts in relation to a new activity of thinking.
Right.
So here, like, do we treat the pasuk as received knowledge, and we're just going deeper into it as a chacham, or are we treating the pasuk as facts, and like what we generate on our own is like tevuna, you know?
Right.
Like I think you can make an argument for both ways.
Well, that becomes just an arbitrary distinction, wouldn't it?
No, I'm not saying it's arbitrary. I'm saying that the very nature of what facts are and knowledge is that they're relative terms. That you have things that are facts, and then that generates. Let's take for example, like, yeah.
I have a thought about what Mishlei is.
Before you do that, I want to finish this thought.
Yes.
Like when you are working on a like there's two different activities. I'm just going to pick Ramam as an example. There's two different activities of like when you're learning a Rambam and trying to come up with a svara, right? So or I guess any Rishonim, like, so you're treating the statements of the Rishonim as the facts, and then you're theorizing about those.
Right.
But in reality, like those things that they are expressing are the outcomes of their theorizing.
Right.
Those aren't facts, you know. So I'm just saying that that's in the hierarchy of, you know, of all areas. And I'll just take another example. Let's say like the notion that there are, the notion of the periodic table, right? So we treat that as factual. We treat all that information as factual. But in truth, like we could come along sometime and like realize that our whole understanding of like, you know, of the nature of nature is different, and then that was really just like an outcome of a certain theory, and those are not facts. Those, you know, yeah. What do you say?
I think that Shlomo set up Mishlei to be like facts that you can get Bina from. Facts that you can get Bina from within a certain framework.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think he set up a framework that allows a person to develop their Bina.
Right. Yes, definitely so. And he says that explicitly in the Hagdama of
Yeah.
Lahavin Imre Bina, right? So these are Imre Bina, you know, statements of understanding, which is an interesting paradox given this definition we're saying here. Because if it's a statement, then you're going to relate to it as Chachma. But Imre Bina in the sense that like it is like a Bina inducer, you know, like it induces like Bina type thinking. Yeah.
So I'm gonna posit a distinction between Bina and Chachma.
Yeah.
That when you're, I'd say just like taking the facts and or taking something and just understanding what it is,
Mhm.
then that's chachma. But when you're going further than that, that's bina. Whatever. I know that's like like hard to draw the line what it is.
Yeah.
That's my like.
Okay, I hear it's a useful distinction.
What's,
Yeah.
What's further than
Right.
what?
Yeah.
How do you get further than
I'd say where let's say you're learning a Rambam, right? And you're getting clarity in like the particulars of what he's saying
Mhm.
and like how he's structuring the halacha. I'd say that's like chachma. But then when you let's say develop like a star for like let's say how this works in like a big picture sense, there's like let's say not what the Roman saying at least like explicitly, or like if you're seeing how this relates to the common mitzvah or something like that, those types of things are bina.
I see.
I have an example I'm going to give after I hear Ezra's. I just noticed that Ezra had his hand raised thing. I don't really look at it so
Thanks.
much. Sorry, Ezra. Yeah.
Okay. So I was gonna say that aren't we understanding the Navon to be someone who's maven davar mitoch davar?
Yeah.
So if they do learn something for the first time, just like the Chacham from external sources,
Right. That's one of the davar. Yeah.
And then so the Chacham would stop there and say like, "Great, I love this knowledge."
Yeah.
Whereas the Navon would kind of like go further and try to like understand what else he can
Yeah.
find from
Yeah. So let me give you this example because I think this will help. And this is my answer to the question here is that I think there is a difference between the da'as in the mind of the Chacham and da'as in the mind of the Navon. And I'm going to use a descriptive term here, but the da'as in the mind of the Chacham is static and the da'as in the mind of the Navon is dynamic. And the example I'm going to give to illustrate that is compare two people who are involved in cooking. Okay. One person looks for a bunch of recipes and follows the recipes and understands the recipes, but then you have someone who, so that like as a chacham, they're relying on these recipes, right? Then you have a navon, and the navon will be relating to these recipes as expressions of an underlying way of thinking about food or underlying like principles. And therefore he's going to be able to be creative with that of like, I can take this element that this dish is trying to do here, and I can come up with a recipe like that expresses it differently here, and he's viewing it as like these are all moving parts that I'm gaining insight into that I can see new possibilities in or create new things out of. Chacham is just relating to it as a fixed like entity, as a fixed thing, and so I know that's just a description, but I think that is something that even when the Navon, even before the Navon comes up with a new knowledge, then he's already relating to the facts as in a different way than the Chacham is. And I'll give you another example in Mishlei and I see this all the time with high school students, especially because we have this, the whole sharing Mishlei moments thing, so like they're at the very, very beginning of the year, or like for some significantly into the year, you'll have students who will come back and say, oh, like that pasuk that we learned, I saw that idea, or like I had an example of that. And you could tell that they're still looking at things in terms of Shlomo gave me a particular idea about this particular thing, but then there becomes a shift where you start to realize that you're thinking about things mishleically, not tied to any pasuk, that the way that you're going about thinking about decision-making is thinking about the consequences, thinking about like the psychological like underpinnings of your decisions. And then when you see Shlomo saying an idea, that's not a fixed particular thing. It is an example of a way of thinking about the world, and like that's tuna, like that's the world that the Maven is in. Yeah.
I actually read an article online that used that exact example of like a cook and a chef. Yeah.
It's good, and I'm sure you can find examples within like theoretical knowledge also. But
so based on the way that we've been talking about it, I think I would say that a a Navon in one area is not necessarily going to be a Navon in other areas. I think depending on why a person's a Navon, they might be, but like I don't think that like I don't think it's necessary or even like specifically like probable.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm still not sure about that because I do think that I mean it might differ from Navon to Navon, but like
Well,
there definitely is I don't know if this is the proper use of the term, a transitive property of like of Tavuna where, so let's put it this way, someone who is not a Navon in any area, their mind is not going to be capable of having that in a new area because they just haven't reached that level of development yet. But if you have reached Tavuna in one area, so then like you will naturally, or you can be naturally inclined to looking for that kind of relationship to a new area of Das. And the possibility that exists there is going to put into check the way you relate to the Chachma, because you'll realize I'm only accessing this at a Chachma level, but there is a Tavuna level to be accessed. That itself like is already a big step ahead. And then there is, I do think there is a phenomenon of like, I'm going to use Aristotle as an example of this, or Socrates as an example, even though they're both very different. Like you could tell that whatever they thought about, like their mind approached it with that same sort of like comprehensiveness. You know, whether you'll achieve it, I think is not guaranteed. But I do think that there is a reality to like a Navon's mind looking at a new area than a Chacham's mind looking at a new area.
well, I guess maybe I'd say like if someone is a Navon in terms of like, if someone I'd say shifts to like a Navon mindset in terms of they're thinking about knowledge and it's applied in a particular area,
Mm-hmm.
then that would happen. But but and then there's also a person can also just be a Navon in one particular area, but like because they feel like they know a lot about this area or whatever, but they're not inclined, but it doesn't necessarily change their inclination of how they think about other things.
I agree with that. Yeah, sure.
Are we saying? I mean, is it that the Navon just has like more understanding now because he went like a level deeper, or is it like me or the like let's say like we're talking about the Rambam, like would you say that he understands more about the Rambam, or he like, or just even the facts that the Chacham has and he has, like even those facts are related to it in a different way, or is it just that he now understands another thing on top of the facts?
I'm saying that he relates to the facts differently.
Uh-huh.
And I'm realizing I'm not putting that into words as clearly as I might be able to, with just right, except for with the recipe analogy. Like I haven't like expressed what clearly expressed like what the difference is. I have to think about it a little bit more. Yeah, I have to give that some more thought.
Okay.
Yeah. I just want to mention a couple other things really quickly here. Is that the Rבינו Yona on our pasuk refers us back to his explanation in Gimel Yotes. And Gimel Yotes, so there's an interesting thing about Gimel Yotes is, if you want to look at it there, it's actually Yotes and Chaf. And if this is something that you're interested in pursuing further, like if you want to spend one more day on this, then this would be a good thing to do next. Okay, so this is talking about God. Okay, Hashem b'chachma yasad aretz konein shemayim b'tvuna. Hashem founded the earth with chachma. He established the heavens with understanding. B'da'ato tehomos nivkau u'shchachim yirafu tal. With his da'as, he cleaved the depths, and the heavens drip with dew. Okay, so hold on that for keep your finger there. Then go to Mishlei 24, chapter 24. Gimel and Daled. You are there? B'chachma yibane bayis uvisvuna yiskonan uvadas chadarim yimalu kol hon yakar v'na'im. So with wisdom he will build a house, with understanding he will establish it, and with da'as he will fill all of its rooms with every precious and fine wealth. Okay, so clearly these two sets of psukim are meant to be like learned together because it's exactly the same, structure, and like Yis-Konan, and like the earth is like the building of the house, and the heavens are like the Yis-Konan, and the Das is like filling it with all the good stuff. So like this is where a lot of the Mefarshim talk about the definitions of these three terms. So what happened? So if you want to spend one more day on the distinction between these, this would be a good thing to do. I've tried to approach these psukim many times. Sometimes been successful, sometimes not, but it's worth another try. But then I saw the Rבינו Yona on Gimel, which you don't have there, says a difference between Chachma, Bina, and Das. And so I'll just read this really quickly here. It says Parag Gimel pasuk Yotes. He says B'Chachma u'V'Tvuna v'Das, B'Chachma Yibani Bayis, V'Nacha Alav Ruach Chachma Uvina. Okay, so he says, Tzarech hadas lagia el hayira b'chol makom. So das is necessary for yiras Hashem in every place. Kach sidran v'chein b'makom hazeh. So this is the order, and same thing here. So the order is always chachma, bina, das, and then yira. Okay, now this is where he says, v'tzarech anu lefarish hatam u'ma inyanam v'chalukam v'chachma tchila. So we have to explain the differences between these, and chachma's first. V'ozen chacham yechashev. So chachma is a wise ear. That's all he explains for that. Okay, so that's like in line with what we were saying. Navon mevin davar mitoch davar, but then he says umegin mizos el hadea. Okay, so from davar mitoch davar you get to dea. Be'inyan shelo yimsa davar lahavin mitochan yavin mishikul hadas. So in something that you cannot be mevin mitocho, you understand through shikul hadas. V'zet tzarich l'kedusha v'yira v'das kedoshim, and that requires kedusha, which seems to come out of left field, yira, and das kedoshim, knowledge of kedoshim. Okay, so whatever that is, and he says leiv navon yikne das, and he quotes our thing. Okay, so just as a possibility here. Well, I mean, what do you think? So the first two are the same, right? Chachma and Bina. But what does it mean that from Bina you get to Das in that an area that you can't be Mevin Mitocho, like you can't use Bina in, you will get it from Shikul Hadas, and you need Kedusha and Yira and Das Kedoshim. You have any first impressions of that?
Hypothesize, but you need the right framework.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying it.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say once he's in that place where he's not like just accepting knowledge,
yeah.
Actually, it kind of is seeing the area like firsthand.
Yeah.
So then he'll have like that intuition to be able to.
Yeah. So intuition, I think, is the key word, and I think what we get from here is when I think of Chachma and Bina just compared to each other, I think of Bina as intuition, but I think the way Rבינו Yona is thinking of it is Chachma is received knowledge, Bina is deduction, and Das is induction.
Bina is deduction.
Yeah. And that's why, because deduction does not require any intuition. Right. But it is extrapolating. It's going beyond what you've received, applying a principle to new particulars. But Das Das requires shikul das, intuition. And I think that's what he means when he says it needs kedusha and yira and das kedoshim. And I don't know how he differentiates between all of those, but the kedusha there is, what's the biggest threat to intuition is if it's affected by your emotions. So kedusha there, I think it is a very relevant concept that your mind needs to be something that is transcending your emotions and not being affected by it. Again, I don't know particularly what he means by yira, but like that would be a further level of development is das.
Wait, and you were saying that chachma is induction?
No, bina is induction. No. Chachma is received knowledge, right. Bina is deduction, and das is induction.
Oh, das is induction.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that what I said? Or okay, yeah.
Wait, and then, hold on. So I guess I'm confused. So are we saying that induction and intuition are the same thing?
Induction requires intuition.
I see.
Yeah, induction is the process of going from particulars to generals or to universals. And you need induction. And I mean, you put it in terms of hypotheses, but like that's one form of arriving at arriving at das. Yeah, or what we call svara. That's induction. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's just something to think about.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, good. So I think we got our idea though in our pasuk though. So
I'm not clear on the practical ramification.
Of our pasuk?
Yeah, I like the.
Okay, so we can think about this more. Yeah. I mean, I do think that what Zev said earlier is true, is that like, knowing what you're capable of and knowing that these are two distinct developmental levels, that's a big problem in many areas of when you're developing in a certain skill and you aren't aware what the levels are, then you mistake one for the other, or you think that you're ready to do something that you're not ready for. Like there's actually a Rבינו Yona, is it here? Hold on. No, it's Rבינו Yona on, let me see if the footnote here is better. On our pasuk, Rבינו Yona quotes a Gemara in Bavli. Hold on. Where is it? This is Yud Ches Vav. Yeah, so in ours he says, I just want to look at the critical edition, or this edition here. I should find it. Yeah, so he says, so Ozen Chachamim, this is on our pasuk. Kasher Amru Zal Ezehu Chacham Halom Mikol Adam, which is another raya, by the way, about it's listening, it's receiving knowledge. Shnemar Mikol Melamda Hiskalti. V'kvar bi'arti midas hachacham. I already explained the midah of the chacham. Kihu mechin libo lakabel hachachma min hachachamim. So that's also interesting that there's a hachana that's like ozen chachama. That it's not just a matter of hearing. There is a way to learn from others. Like there's an art, and that's a distinct developmental level of learning from others. And then he says, "Ukinin shamru chazal yilmod ha'adam chachma ve'achar kach yishtadel lahagia ahasvara." First, you should learn chachma, then you should strive to reach svara. Okay, so like I know that the word svara is used in different ways, but like there have been so many cases I've seen come through the yeshiva, in all my years here, of like guys who are not like don't have an ozen chachama, and they immediately try to proceed to svara, and they're mixing their developmental steps. So that itself, I think, is a huge practical application in terms of if you want to become a Navon, you have to know what the difference is between a Navon and a Chacham. Then there's the particular applications, like Zev is saying, is like don't attempt, Tavuna if you, just recognize the limitations of your attempting Tavuna if you're not at that level yet.
Yeah.
And then the third one is if you're going to say that Tavuna is referring to all forms of producing new knowledge, meaning if you're going to extend it to induction and deduction, so then that requires even more caution in terms of knowing when you're on the level of Tavuna or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess one thing that I mean it makes sense to me, but again, I don't know how to like this into a process.
Yeah.
Is it like we're treating it as developmental levels? Like you go to Chachma, then you go to Bina.
Yeah.
Are we seeing that for our pasuk or from?
Rבינו says it's in every place.
Oh.
That was what we read in Gimel. It says that in every place it always goes Chachma, then Bina, and then Das. Yeah. And in Mishlei also, like specifically. Yeah. All right, let's stop here for today. All right. And we gotta have some bookkeeping here. Yeah.